Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining this little webinar here Monday. And thank you for calling in from all these beautiful places around the world. There are still a few people who are going to join us here today. I think we're going to be all in all 25 people today. Um, so obviously, I'm sure that most of you know me. I'm Thomas, but I also have Myra on board here to help me today. So any technical issues or whatever, Myra will be there to help you throughout this webinar. And she will also be sharing some insights in the chat as we go along. So we're really excited to obviously have you here. And you will also have obviously an opportunity to ask questions in the chat. We will do some small breaks as well, some small exercises where you obviously will be able to pose questions or whatever. And you can do that two ways. Obviously, you can, when that is, turn on your camera. Myra can help unmute you and you can ask the question, or you can just ask it in the chat and I'll come back to that. So if there's suddenly a question in the back of your mind, you're like, just ask it and we will come back to it. So hopefully we can make it a super fun and engaging session here on a Monday. And obviously what we're going to talk about here today is really how to create a meaningful brand, and really essentially also the journey that I've been on the last 10 years working on purpose and working on meaningful brands. And obviously also just due to the fact that I have this book that came out in June. But I will do just a little bit of background for those of you who don't know me that well, just to kind of share where I'm coming from and the background. So I started out in advertising about a decade ago as a copywriter. I don't know if there's any copywriters on this call, but this was how I started, and then later on founded a small independent ad agency that then today have pivoted into what I call the Goodvertising Agency. And obviously at the agency we do a couple of different things. And our main mission is really to help you become a catalyst for change. And this is something that has actually been the core of what I have done over the last 10 years, which obviously also started with my first book. But at the agency, we kind of do four things. We do inspiration. So we work with a lot of different organizations and brands to deliver inspiration. And that might be through keynotes, that might be through the effort that we've been running now, I believe actually for a decade now, called Goodvertising, where we kind of share, best practice from the Goodvertising space. So if you haven't visited the website, do go and see some of the work there. You're also more than welcome to submit exciting campaigns from wherever you are. It can be stuff that you made or stuff that other people have made. Honestly, we also do a lot of educational initiatives that actually might be, internal education, that might be keynotes and workshops and conferences at masterclasses. Obviously now, during the pandemic, we are trying to bring this message out to all of you, through Zoom calls and whatever other clever ways we can find of obviously bringing this message and this very, very important conversation to as many people as possible. We also do work at the forefront of change, whether that is campaigns or consulting, and we've done that for multiple years, worked with big global clients like IKEA and Carlsberg, and we also do work quite a bit directly with agencies on some of their clients. So always do feel free to reach out whatever problem you might have. The last little bit we do at the Goodvertising Agency is really something that I'm quite passionate about. We work with impact businesses and scaling up impact businesses. There's a lot of really exciting entrepreneurs out in the social and environmental space, and obviously that's something that I'm incredibly passionate about. Also, obviously, through a lot of the judging, I do most of the judging for a lot of big global award shows, whether that is D&AD or Cannes or some of the smaller ones. There's actually one coming up now soon for the Drum. For those of you who know that, it's a UK-based marketing magazine, so they have a Purpose Award as well. So lots of interesting stuff happening there. And obviously one good way of keeping up to date with that, I'm sure that most of you do that already, is obviously to follow some of the stuff, whether that is across LinkedIn or Facebook or Instagram or whatever all that stuff is called. But essentially my little pivot in the world of advertising actually started about a decade ago now, where I wrote my first book, Good Advertising, this little heavy book here. And obviously that is quite some time ago. So that's a fairly younger Thomas there. And back then, it might seem surprising, but back then this whole idea about brands and businesses playing a bigger role in our lives than just plugging products was quite new. And I think the thing that provoked me back then was just in fact that I was growing a little bit tired of the world of advertising and really starting to ask myself the questions, why am I, selling cheeseburgers to people who are already way too fat? Why am I, selling cars in cities that are more and more congested? And my little light bulb moment back then was actually the fact that there was the climate summit in Copenhagen. So that was what provoked me then. But the dialogue that I want to have with you here today, and why I thought that it was about time to actually go up against my earlier belief in purpose. I'm sure that a lot of you on this Zoom call obviously have worked with purpose or shaped purpose, whether that on an internally in brand side or agency side, or you might have worked with purposeful campaigns. But one thing I really saw starting to happen about probably 4 to 5 years ago was in fact more and more brands are rushing into this space. I sometimes a little bit jokingly say, in some ways purpose are a little bit like Pokemon. Everybody is searching for it, but nobody really knows why. So the space has definitely changed from my first book to my second book. Because today the space looks a little bit like this. All these brands, organizations, and leaders being incredibly busy talking about all the good stuff they're doing, showcasing all the good stuff they're doing, saying, look at us, we're doing something for the sea turtles. Look at us, we're doing something with microplastics. Look at us, we are cutting down on carbon emissions. So obviously it does seem today that it almost seems like when you go into the supermarket, it does seem a little bit like every brand is pitching itself as a new Mother Teresa or as a new Gandhi. And obviously, really depending on markets, but especially, I'm calling in from Copenhagen here today in Scandinavia, and that is very much so the case. So obviously when everybody in this space is trying to outcry each other, saying, oh, we care so much, or everybody is trying to almost do like an innovation marathon to try and outdo each other. I'm sure that some of you might have been hearing about the term story doing, the fact that if you through actions, it will demonstrate more authentically that you do care. But I don't think ultimately that will be the case, because when is that marathon stopping, and how can you ultimately prove that you will be winning? And especially if you are representing, for example, a bigger FMCG brand, how are you ever going to catch up with a lot of the smaller players in this space? So obviously, most companies have been taking, an approach to purpose that I used to believe in myself, starting to ask the big question, why? Why do you exist as an organization? Why do you wake up in the morning as a leader? What is it that drives you? What is it that wakes you up in the morning? What is it that ticks you? And obviously one of the examples that a lot of you have seen is obviously a brand like Patagonia. And if you actually really listen to what Patagonia is saying, we are in the business to save our home planet. And yes, it does sound fascinating. And yes, Patagonia might be delivering on this, but in so many instances, you are actually setting up for failure because you are, in a way, taking a very navel-gazing approach to purpose, to the role that your organization is playing. And I'm not saying that Patagonia is necessarily wrong, but what I think is so difficult if you follow in this footstep and if you put yourself up on this hero purpose pedestal is that it's very, very easy to criticize. And I mean, I've seen it again and again with some of the cases that I had in the book for example, Volkswagen or Chipotle, that by taking this approach, it is easy to criticize you. So obviously, one of the things that are rapidly changing in this space is obviously the more people that are rushing into space, the more people who talk about good advertising. I should be happy that more businesses are, but it does seem like there's something in this approach that needs to be revised, because the more companies talk about these world bettering claims, it does seem like less and less people are believing it. And obviously, it's interesting to hear what you think about this, if this is something that you can recognize either from the brands that you work with, or maybe just personally that you are maybe growing an inertia with all these claims. And one of the surveys, obviously, and there's lots of surveys to prove this, is from Deloitte, a survey that have shown how younger people are really believing that even though the business is talking about that there is something higher in life than just profit, it does seem like these young people just simply aren't buying into it. So maybe there's something in this approach that is not working. And secondly, something that I've always been very interested in, and something that actually provoked me to write this second book, The Hero Trap, was in fact, what does it take to create change? What does it take to create change and skill? And if we actually look at how the business case of purpose is going, it does seem still that there's this gap between what people are saying they want to buy. So they say they want to buy from purposeful organizations, but only 26% follow through. So isn't it interesting that there is this gap of 39% of people who say they want to buy from purposeful brands, but are not following through? So how can we motivate them? How can we get those 39% to take action? And actually, in fact, when I wrote the book, the thing that provoked me was actually, in fact, that I looked at my own life and realized how bad I was at creating the necessary change in my life. Because in so many ways, we are our own biggest enemies to the change that we want to see. So maybe if we talk about leadership, and maybe if we talk about what is needed to create change, maybe we're looking at it from the wrong perspective. Because if we think about the change dilemma, I think all of us every new year are pledging something that we want to see happening in our lives, right? Maybe we want to exercise a little bit more. But I promise you, at least from my point of view, just a couple of weeks into January, all those running shoes are still lying in the corridor. So change is difficult. And I think basically purpose is about change. It is about creating change. It's about finding a meaningful role for your brand, or if you are a leader, what is the meaningful role you can play in people's lives? And that got me to look at change from another perspective. Because instead of pitching the organization or the leader as the agent of change, I saw a completely different question that actually enabled change on a much bigger scale. And that is a very simple question. Who can you help people become? Because suddenly you are stepping down from that purpose pedestal and actually saying, what are some of the changes that you want to see in your life? What are some of the dreams? What are some of the aspirations? And let me give you one example. And this is actually an example from a Danish company. And they're called Årstiderne, which kind of stands for seasons. or translates to seasons anyway. And basically what the company does is that they have these boxes that they deliver to the doorstep, and it comes with farm fresh produce. But not only that, it also comes with a recipe. And the interesting thing is that they have taught me how to cook more plant-based. I always felt that with, often stuck in an airplane back in the days when that happened, I wanted to kind of lower my carbon footprint a little bit. And obviously cooking is one of the places where that could be done. So by giving me those recipes, they took a completely different way. And obviously most of the time I felt that, yeah, this is going pretty well, being lucky, creating this beautiful vegan pie. But obviously most of the time when it comes to change is difficult. But the interesting thing is when you listen to what Årstiden is saying, they're not taking the navel-gazing approach and asking why do they exist, in the sense that, we're in the business to save our home planet. When I interviewed their CEO, he talked about something else. He talked about Earth connection. The fact that Årstiden is there to help you discover the connection with the earth, with the vegetables, and really understanding and connecting with the joy of cooking. So it's a different mindset. It's a different way of looking at leadership, where the leader is helping you grow. And in so many aspects, it does reflect how this market is really changing. And I actually will argue that we are heading towards what I would call a post-purpose market, in the sense that everybody today is talking about purpose. It does seem like every time a new soft drink is being launched, they know, oh yes, young people care so much about purpose, care so much about environment, we're probably going to add that to the marketing mix. So in a way, the market have changed from, especially my first book, Goodvertising, came out. And obviously, if we look at how it's changed in general, and the one axis of this graph talks about the brand promise, and the other one, what is essentially the value for the customers. And obviously, in the good old days of marketing, we talked very much about functional benefits, when there still was a sort of meaningful difference you could play. So playing on, for example, a faster car. Then we wanted to create brands that were more human, and we talked about emotions, and we dressed brands in this, with a beating heart. So, for example, talking about a more masculine car, so that might be the BMW, so you feel like a real man when driving a BMW. And then when my first book came out, Goodvertising, we certainly talked about the societal difference. So maybe it's a more environmentally friendly car, so that might be the Prius. And obviously where I think we're heading today is really towards a transformational marketplace, where it's much more about what is in it for me. How can you as a brand help me achieve some of the things that I want to see in my life? So heading towards being a conscious traveler. And I think that is something that maybe a lot of you can recognize, because if you look at how people buy things today, they are no longer just buying what you make, or for that say why you make it, because today every brand is claiming to have higher values. But the real proof point is really, who can you help people become? And if you look at traveling, obviously, it used to be that you will go on a travel and you'd maybe buy a go to this beautiful hotel, and it's all about buying stuff. But today, it's really not about buying. It's much more about experiences. So you might go to this little vineyard in Tuscany, and you'll learn how to make pasta. So in that way, it has really changed. And the tool that I'll introduce to you here today is a tool that is called the Arrow. And this was really where I saw you could create a meaningful difference in people's lives. It was not just some purpose written on the wall. And the Arrow for me was really inspired by psychotherapy. It was inspired by coaching, because those two disciplines are in fact goal oriented. They look at moving me from intent to action. So let me introduce the arrow for you here, and we're gonna play around with it a little bit later. And the arrow actually asks 4 pivotal questions. What is it you do? How are you unique in delivering your product or service? Who can you help people become? And the last bit is, when do you enable this change? And obviously the what is the product or service you sell. So that might be the running shoes. The what is really never a constant. I mean, if you take Apple and you see how they're pivoting to many different lines of business in film and music, so obviously the what can change. The second question is, how are you unique in delivering your products or service? So that might be that it's done in a more convenient way. The third question is really the important one in this instance, because who can you help people become? So this is the personal transformation that you can enable. This is really where you create meaning as a brand. Because if you think about it, and you think about your own life, how many brands and how many leaders have actually created a meaningful difference in your life? How many have maybe made you smarter, healthier, more connected, whatever that might be? And when I asked myself that question, there wasn't actually a lot of brands on that list. I mean, I mentioned one of them before, Årstiderne, who helped me cook more plant-based. It's actually interesting because when I did the research to the book Goodvertising back then purpose was the new thing. Not a lot of brands embraced purpose wholeheartedly. So I do think that there is an important and meaningful role for brands and leaders to play if they find that meaningful difference. The last question is the when. So when do you enable this change? So that might be a specific time of day, a situation, it might be a life phase, a state of mind. For example, when working with IKEA, the one question or the one answer that came out to that when question was, in fact, every day. So when you look at the arrow and the outcome of that process, I didn't want to call it the purpose. And obviously, you know, we can always discuss the wording, but for me, it was important that I launched a new term, a new way of talking about it. And I called it a transformational promise, because I think purpose might be a word that is too good for its own good, because maybe you are overstating your role. Maybe you are, in fact, over-promising. When I talk about a transformational promise, it is really from you as an organization or from you as a leader. It is a promise about a commitment about positive change that you can enable people's lives. So it's really focused on specific change. And let me give you an example of how those two play out. So a typical purpose that asks why could be Patagonia, we're in the business to save our home planet. And compare that to, and I'm sure you know the toy maker, who is actually Danish, Lego, and they talk about inspiring and developing the builders of tomorrow. So it's focused on self-growth. It's focused on pushing people towards something they want to see realized in their lives. And let me give you another case I want to share with you here today. And it's actually a health insurance company called Discovery in the UK. They are called Vitality, and their transformative promise is, in fact, to incentivize people to live healthier. Incentivize people to live healthier. And they've been extremely good at pushing their customers towards that end goal. So actually getting people to, bridge that gap of 39% that I talked about a little bit earlier. One of the things they've done is that they launched a program called Vitality, and it's basically a sort of a reward program as you know from many other businesses. But here they reward the customers for living healthy in so many different ways. So maybe it's about buying healthy fruit and vegetables. They get rewarded for every time they go down to the gym. And by doing that program, they have done a survey across 5 markets, 200,000 people, and the people who take part in the Vitality program actually do exercise 5 times more per month. So think about the massive change that they have enabled by taking a different approach, but taking an approach that is focused on motivating people to creating the change that I want to see in their lives. So this is really important, really the difference between a purpose and a transformative promise. And now I know I have been doing quite a bit of talking here already. So it could be interesting just to maybe from your side hear some reflections about purpose versus a transformational promise. And then we will kind of dig into how do we actually shape this? What are some of the tools? What are some of the tricks that I can share with you here today? So you're obviously welcome to either maybe write some reflections in the chat about the difference between a transformational promise and a purpose, or maybe just some overall reflections before we go into the next part. And obviously, you're also welcome to raise your hand if you want to ask a question, and Myra can help unmute you. So yes, so at least the definition. So thank you so much for asking that, Hope Friedman. So I'll just quickly bounce into that slide again, just giving you the sort of definition, if one would like. I mean, so this was how I framed it. You know, a transformational promise is a commitment towards a positive change you enable in people's lives as a leader. So obviously, really the difference between asking why or who can you help people become. So any reflections on that? And if not, we will. So we have a question here from Swan Eric. Thank you, Swan, and thank you so much for joining. And Swan comments on this little fact about that this is a mix between brand and culture. So in a way, the mix between marketing and HR. So the internal culture and how and the reflections around that, and it's actually a very, very good point. And I think this is actually what really makes purpose and this conversation extremely interesting, especially because it is essentially about leadership. And one of the things that I have seen working with organizations, and obviously the last many years shaping purposes, we always used to kind of go with the approach of, for example, Simon Sinek, the start with the why. So why do you do what you do? And what I always saw was that it actually always very much ended up with being very kind of broad theme that came out of it. Whereas as soon as you ask, who can you help people become, it actually becomes much more focused on the individual change. And so one of the examples that I have in the book as well is actually, this very much goes to the internal culture, is in fact that the more precise you are on the change that you enable in people's lives, I think the more successful you are at actually creating that change. One of them organizations is Kind Snacks. And the interesting thing is that Kind Snacks is actually out there. They claim that because it's made with kind ingredients that are kinder to your body, but also kinder to the planet, they are on a mission to create kindness. And I think, especially during these quite divided times, I think we could all need a little bit more kindness. But it's interesting to see that when they measure that internally, 86% of employees actually feel kinder than before that they joined Kind Snacks. So I think there is a real connection between the transformational promise and how good these organizations and leaders are at getting people to adapt it. So there's some more questions here. So Alexis from Green Ira. So what would a transformational promise look like from a more environmental approach? So that's a very good question. And I think, in fact, I will come back to sharing a bit of the models in terms of where you find where you find that meaningful role you can play in people's lives. But maybe the fact is, and this is a very good point, Alexis, is in fact that very few of us actually do wake up as a sort of Greta Thunberg and want to go out there and save the world. I mean, take food waste, for example. Why are some of us maybe trying to go on a battle against food waste? It might not be just simply because of the climate. It might actually be that we want to be a more considerate husband, a more considered mum. So it is really about kind of breaking it down away from this do good for people and planet, which is very difficult to operationalize. So for me, it's really about finding that little simple, meaningful role you can play, and then you can play a big environmental role. One of the brands that I interviewed for the book was actually, in fact, Oatly, the Swedish oat milk brand, and obviously they are their mission, which obviously becomes an environmental mission, is in fact to get people to pivot to more a plant-based lifestyle. Good. So let me just take 3 more questions here before we head on again. So, comment here from Hope as well. Currently, Purpose has an external lens, especially during COVID shutdown, etc., with a heavy lean with partnering with nonprofits and nonprofits to solve problems. Does Transformational Promise have an external focus to scale up positive societal impact? So again, in a way, touching on, in fact, a little bit the same as you touched on, Alexis. I think the thing is that we have to focus on the change that we can enable in people's day-to-day lives, because else it's going to be an mission that none of us are going to succeed with. So what are some of the smaller, meaningful roles that you can find and play in people's life? Because this is where you can, in fact, motivate them to create the needed change. And I'm going to show you in a little while a couple of examples of that. Because what I saw very much working with especially big organizations, was in fact that within industries, it is very often the very same challenges that these industries are facing. So if you are working with a bank, it might be the fact that you have senior citizens who are, for example, disconnected from digital. It might be the fact that brick and mortar banks are kind of closing and all that stuff. So how then to find a purpose that is not just becoming what every other brand is claiming as well, or talking about, banks as financial infrastructure, whatever it might be, where in fact it becomes really interesting, where you as a brand look at the roles you can play in people's lives. And there's many, many roles there really to be found. We have a question here from Marie. Marie Christine, so thank you so much. Can you really shift from emotional to transformational brands? And do you think brands need to assess the societal impact first? We have a hard time trying to bring brands to truly make a difference. Yes, I think all of us have been on this journey, obviously, to try and find a big societal role for these brands to play. And maybe that is, in fact, one of the issues that I found with Purpose was, in fact, that we might have forgotten, in fact, that what most of us just want is a brand that helps us cope with living life. Some of those kind of smaller things, because by the end of the day, as I said, we are our own biggest barriers to change. And if we can find that little thing to unlock it, and that's exactly what we'll do in the next part here, there's something really interesting that can be found. And Twy, Eric have a very good comment here as well. So we know that 70% are disconnected at work, so there is actually an engagement booster. I would say it is. I mean, I do think that, from the earlier days, I have seen a lot of problems from organizations to implement purpose. And maybe in fact, because it isn't focused on the personal change. And I remember I did a talk at the Unilever headquarters in UK at Embankment, and I remember one woman raising her hand and saying, I buy into this whole thing. This was when Paul Polman and Keith Wade were still with Unilever. I buy into this whole idea about purpose and all this stuff, but I'm working on this specific brand in Unilever. I might work here for a couple of years more, then I might work at some other place in Unilever, and then I might go and work for some other company. Why the heck should I stick out my neck for purpose? And that's exactly my issue, is that I think if we look at it, most of us go to work for self-growth, for self-actualization. And I think this is where the starting point needs to be at. Take people in creative industry. I can see quite a few of you work ad agencies here. And, the interesting thing is, most creatives that I know don't necessarily go to work for that client selling dog food. No, they go to work because they are inherently creative. They just can't help burning the candle in both ends for creativity. That's what keeps them awake at night. And I think this is also, if we look at a product like Apple, Apple definitely have a transformational brand promise. In fact, think different, something that I think they have been true to at core. Isn't it interesting today that, a little iPhone like this can make even a little 5-year-old girl more creative, take photos, do videos, draw, all of that stuff. So I think it's about time that we come back to that. So last little question before we go on, and this is from Constanza. So thank you so much for asking that question. And he is an advertising master student at UAL in London. So doing his final project about purpose, and he's talking about the difference between why I exist and who I can help people become is the place you put yourself as a company within society. Why put the brand at the heart? Who can I help people become? Puts consumers at the heart. And it changes the whole perspective, in my opinion. But my question is, how can you truly show the genuine and authentic intent behind the role you have to want to have within society? Thank you so much. And I very much agree with the way that you talk about leadership, because why does in fact pits the leader and the company as the agent of change? And obviously by doing that, obviously put yourself up for a lot of criticism. Whereas the other approach to leadership is in fact that you take the back seat and you help people becomes the agents of change. So it's the difference between being a preacher and being a coach. And what I've seen is that when you take the coaching role, suddenly if you are not succeeding, so let's say that I wasn't really being, as I said with Austin, I want to live more plant-based, my cooking wasn't really successful, blah, blah, blah. At least I can't just point fingers at Austin and saying, hey, that's wrong, because suddenly change becomes a two-way street. We are working together to create change. And I think this is really where it becomes pivotal, because the biggest testament, the most authentic thing I think a brand can do is actually to help create the change that we want to see in our lives, because that is the ultimate proof point. When Nike is pushing me to go on that run, this is where I think the real difference is at. So thank you so much for these first couple of questions, and I'm going to share some of the methodologies that is part of the book as well. That's part of the methodology that can hopefully help you find that meaningful role, that transformational promise to play in people's lives. And obviously, you are more than welcome to write questions in the chat as we go along. But I'll just, in respect of time, push forward a little bit and show you some of the models that you can use. And all of these models are part of the book, and I'm going to share a little tool with you a little bit later as well that you can use. So one way of working with finding the meaningful role, the who can you help people become, is really looking at what I would call a who word. So sort of a blue ocean, if you look at it from a competitive point of view. So obviously, what are your competitors' promises in a certain category? So for example, I talked about Kind Snacks and how they have found a clever way of owning kindness in kind of the snack category. So promoting kindness, and kindness obviously both being kind to planet, kind to your own health, and kind to others. So obviously it's looking at your products and service to see how can they deliver a meaningful difference. And lastly, who do people want to become? And obviously what you're looking for is obviously that little centerpiece where you have something meaningful you can own. And there's lots of interesting things out there. One of the companies I spoke to that was started by Tom and Max is these hard Tom and Max. And they created a company called District Vision. And basically what District Vision does is they are selling running glasses. So apparently you need running glasses when running. I didn't know that to begin with. But in fact, that's not what they're selling. So they're not selling the what, but in fact, the who can they help people become? Because what they are selling people is what they call mindful running. In fact, the idea that if you don't have your head tuned into your running, you'll give up. And I think this is something that a lot of you can recognize on this call. At least it's something that I can recognize when you have a bad day and you're like thinking, oh, I don't feel like running, etc. Your running becomes worse. So they found a really interesting role to play in people's lives. That mindful running is something that today they even have a program in New York where they teach prisoners mindful training. So as I said, this model has the era has really been inspired by psychotherapy and coaching, and obviously how to create a good life. And I think this is a central theme for me always. I don't like to talk about sustainability. I like to talk about what is a good life. And a good life can obviously be found and cut into many different dimensions. I have divided it into 12 different dimensions. And I'm certain that all of you can recognize these different dimensions and how sometimes we can be struggling with some of these things. Obviously now during COVID-19, people have been furloughed, people have lost their work. Obviously that sometimes knocks people out of course. It might be family, it might be finances, physical health and wellness. And this is sort of more of a starting point for where you can find this meaningful difference. As I said, a running glass company have actually found a sort of a different way. So it's not just talking about, for example, physical health and fitness, but it's actually much more talking about, for example, personal development and well-being. And obviously brands like Kind Snacks, as I said, I mean, they've chosen kindness as their thing, and really created lots of exciting programs, lots of exciting initiatives where they are promoting kindness and encouraging people to do all sorts of kind snacks. It can also just be, for example, uncluttering people's lives, like this brand called KonMari, that's kind of trying to teach people minimalist lifestyles. And even a hotel chain, and this is more on a kind of product level, and I think this is something, at least for all the parents in this call, is something I'm sure you know from your life, the fact that, oh, wow, kids are on those iPads and iPhones way too much. So one of the things they wanted to do in the family space is really to create a sort of digital detox program. Very clever, in fact, because basically one, or not the only thing that the hotel is doing, is really just to kind of say to people, leave your gadgets at the front desk and spend time with your family. So when you work on this is really obviously to look at what meaningful role do you play in people's lives? Can you play in people's lives? And obviously looking now at those 12 dimensions. And one of one of the ways we often do it, and this is something that you can see on our website as well, is that we created this little sort of sheet, this way for you to work with identifying the transformational promise that will guide you from the arrow down to identifying the who, what, down to looking at kind of those 12 dimensions, and then ultimately, shaping your transformative promise. And for us, this is a sheet that is really helpful. This is something you can ask your clients to do. This is something that you can do internally if you work brand side, and really try and see how you can foster it. And obviously, it's not just about brands. It is ultimately also about leadership ultimately, and how you can obviously find that transformative promise that can unlock change. So really thinking carefully about the role. And the big difference is obviously that you don't end up with this overarching, very broad sort of purpose of saying, we're in the business to save our home planet, but something that is really linked in what matters in our lives. What is it that we're aspiring towards? It's much more about our dreams, our visions. And this is obviously where I think meaningfulness comes from. And a second thing that's really interesting, talking about change, is in fact how this approach bridges this gap that I talked about, the purpose gap, this division between what the change we want to see in our lives, and how good we are actually on acting on it. And one of the ways that we wanted to explore, try and understand and research this phenomena, was actually to compare campaigns, and compare purposeful campaigns with transformative campaigns. And we did a study of 8 campaigns, and the first one being a transformative campaign. And some of you might have seen this ad from last year's Super Bowl, where Budweiser talked about, and Myra going to share a link with the film as well, but where Budweiser obviously talked about their commitments towards renewable energy. I talked about this, but for a better tomorrow. So either offsetting the brewing process or buying windmills. So compare this classical purposeful approach to a more transformational approach. This is quite a famous campaign from Always, and obviously talking about how the sentence "like a girl" used to be an insult, but obviously now it's a statement of pride, and really saying to these young girls in quite a challenging time, when they're obviously growing up from girls to women, saying you are incredible, unstoppable, and do things like a girl with pride. And so when we did that research, the interesting thing was that when we look at brand warmth and brand competence, as you can see, the first 4 ones, the one with the underline is the transformational campaigns. The other 4 ones from T-Mobile to Budweiser are the purposeful ones. So in brand warmth and competence, it is pretty much the same across the board. Obviously, all of these campaigns have been tested true and true before they were aired. So obviously they test very high. But the interesting thing is, if you look at competence, so even though the transformational campaigns don't talk about look at us and look at the stuff we're doing as a brand, they still are seen as very competent. But the big difference is really on motivation. So you can see people feel incredibly motivated by a transformational approach. But when you take a purposeful approach, that plateaus and falls down. So generally, when doing this research, people were 29.4% more motivated by a transformational approach than a purposeful approach. And even, which I think is quite interesting as well, when we talk about how can we find a meaningful role to play in people's lives, people actually are willing to pay a premium price. So WTPP obviously being willing to pay a premium price. So in fact, people want to play more for brands that play a transformational role in their lives. And that's again something that I definitely could recognize from Årstiderne, the people who did the little box at the doorstep. So even though there are competitors today, I am incredibly thankful, obviously, for the help and all the stuff that Årstiderne have taught me. So I'm obviously not as price sensitive. So obviously this is a way to see when you take an approach, where you as an organization, where you as a leader have a laser sharp focus on the change you want to enable people's life, there are a higher chance that people are acting on it. And obviously by the end of the day, most likely also a higher chance that people will be buying into your products and services. So this is obviously the sort of latter part of for me why I did revise my look at purpose and felt it was about time that we took a different approach by really understanding how you as a leader or how you as a brand can find that role. But maybe before we go on, and we have still a little bit of time left in the latter part of this webinar, I actually want to show you how, when you have found your transformational promise, how you can actually look at your marketing in a completely different way and turning people from passive recipients or target group into active participants. Because today, especially young people, aren't just sitting there and waiting to be targeted as sitting ducks. They are used to be able to shape products and services. I mean, most of them are selling stuff on Instagram at a very early age. Quite a lot of people are or have experience maybe with, you know, renting out the place at Airbnb and setting the price and understanding the products and services. So we are all becoming small professional marketeers, and I think it's important that we take that pivot responsibly as well and start really helping people become participants. But I just want to go back to giving you a possibility for asking some questions. So if you do have some questions out there, please either do write them in the chat, or as I said, I mean, raise your hand and Myra can help unmute you or put on the video as well. So just a small Q&A before we continue into this second part of the webinar where we look at the marketing mix. So any questions out there? It doesn't seem like it right away anyway. But as I said, you are obviously welcome to ask questions throughout as well. I just wanted to give you this little possibility to do so. But let's jump into the second part. Okay, we have one question here again. Hope, thank you so much. So this is great, Thomas. How does transformational promise differ from traditional brand promise? Obviously, you can say that, you know, by the end of the day, a transformational promise is a purpose, in the sense that this is, you know, the company's higher mission. But I will, though, say that for me, it was just so important to name it differently, because I do think there's a tremendous difference, as I said, between the two, in the sense that the why obviously focus at you as a brand or as a leader and the change that you want to create, whereas the who, it's much more about being this coach that helps people achieve some of the dreams, some of the aspirations, some of the changes that they want to see in their lives. You turn them into the active participants. And this is incredibly important, because with the why, you are in so many instances setting yourself up for criticism, in the sense that you are promising, and sometimes I would say over promising, the role that you play. Whereas with the second approach, who can you help people become, it becomes much more of a partnership. It becomes much more of a um, a a focused approach. And I think basically one of the things that I was incredibly tired of working on traditional purposes was that they often became very broad, like do good for people and planet. And how can you, to Svein Erik's point earlier, how can that work as a driver inside and outside the organization? Because how many of us wake up with this idea about do good for people and planet? Whereas if you take something that's much sharper and much more focused on a dimension that you can measure, that you could follow up on. Let's take Kind Snacks. When they talk about kindness, it's very, very concrete, and that's something that you definitely can execute internally and externally across campaigns and internal engagement. So for me, that's very important. The why is so much about your vision and your dreams as a leader, whereas the who is really about my dreams and my visions. And I would actually claim that does sound a little bit more beneficial in my ears. So thank you for asking that question. And let's delve into this latter part of it, where we look at the marketing mix, and I'll try and do it fast in respect of time, and for us also to have the possibility to obviously discuss this part a little bit further. So no doubt about it, a lot is happening in marketing these days. And as I said, I've been in the industry for about 20 years. And I think the biggest change is probably this, that today we don't have any control in the marketing space anymore. Everybody does, and everybody have a voice. And it is incredibly difficult as a brand today to navigate in that space. I mean, isn't it interesting, in fact, that the biggest movement 2 years ago was in fact from not from our industry, but it was the Me Too movement that obviously created a big conversation in society. So there is a big change happening, also in the way that that we view brands in today's marketing space. I'm sure that a lot of you have followed the Meaningful Brand Surveys from Havas, and often how they talk about how people today have very high expectations of brands and leaders to play a meaningful role in their lives. Often numbers, depending on the territories, but numbers from 7 to 8 up to 86% think that obviously companies have a responsibility to play in solving environmental and social challenges. But an interesting thing is, in fact, that today more and more people see themselves as the active change agents. And this is definitely something that I see in my day-to-day life. And one very concrete example was, in fact, that when I did a lecture at a business school not too long ago, and I've done this lecture now for 4 years at the same business school, I asked the students, so we're doing a panel with a lot of big brands. So typically, if you're at a business school, you would think that a lot of the students would love to go and work for these big brands. But when I asked in a room of about 300 to 400 people, it was in fact not more than 20 to 30 people who were raising their hands and saying, yes, we are, just can't wait to go and work for these big businesses. I think today a lot of people want to have a say. They see themselves as entrepreneurs. And I think this is also why there's a real pivot happening, where when I was a kid, Ben & Jerry's was obviously looked at as this super purposeful company with this amazing ice cream, and you kind of felt that you could almost feel the beating heart of the founders, Ben and Jerry. But today, I'm in Copenhagen. I have, I don't know how many ice cream shops just around the corner. And when I go down there, I mean, I can talk to the owner. It's not about processes, and you can kind of feel the purpose. So something is happening for sure. So let me give you one example. I mean, when you have, for example, Starbucks and Howard Schultz that go out there and talk about changing the community one coffee at a time. There was a young woman called Marita Lacroix, and she went up against that, and she didn't believe in the words of Howard Schultz. She wanted to work for Starbucks to begin with, but she didn't get the job because her hair was blue. So she set out to create her own little coffee empire called Wheelies out of Sweden. And and the interesting thing is it's really to empower young people to own and run a coffee shop themselves. And it's quite an empowering business model because, in fact, not many people have $500,000 lying around to become a Starbucks franchisee. But maybe if you nag your mom quite a bit, you might be able to get $5,000. And when I interviewed Marita Lacroix about the business model behind it, she really talked about how she was a platform for people's dreams and aspirations and going up against these big retail brands. And it's interesting to see how she doesn't go in there and dictate a sort of purpose, but how it is really about for people to find the purpose. And so, for example, some of the wheelers in Copenhagen, they do it because they absolutely love coffee. In different places. In Lebanon, the wheelies there was just simply a guy who just wanted to work long hours to feed his family. So whatever dreams and aspirations, Marita Lacroix have created this vehicle for whatever people like. And it's interesting to see when we talk about purpose, if you go down in Starbucks, where do you get the best customer service? Where do people feel a burning passion? When you have your own little wheelies, or obviously when you work behind the counter in Starbucks. So I think it is really about understanding that there's a drastic change happening right now that is really challenging the way we look at business, the way we look at the whole marketing mix. And so one of the things that I created was this breakdown of the marketing mix and how we need to change away from this centralized model and actually turning people from passive recipients into active participants. So I call this model the wheel of transformability, and in a way you can see it almost like a steering wheel, and it's really about giving people further out you are on the steering wheel, the more you are in control. So obviously it goes from, if we take the promotion part of it, it actually goes from how you as an organization always used to say, we promote, doing your usual mass marketing, to engaging people, to say we engage, that might be a cost of a survey or something like that, to saying we co-promote. So this might be a little effort where you give people some sort of control to ultimately handing over the reins of the campaign to people. So for example, if you take a campaign like the Movember movement, that is obviously happening every year in November, where you can grow a mustache, to obviously put attention to when it started, at least testicular cancer, and now it more is mental in general. And obviously how the Movember movement opens up for people's creativity and craving for doing whatever they want. It's a much more playful approach to this. So for me, the idea is really for you as an organization, leader, as a brand, to give people as much control. So this is really what I call transformability, your ability as an organization to put people in charge of the marketing mix. And it's interesting to see what does happen when you do that. I mean, if we look at the campaign side, as I said, moving from a we promote to a you promote mindset. And one of the campaigns that I think is really interesting is REI. It's a US-based cooperative. And when we talk about having a meaningful role to play in people's lives, they definitely found a campaign that had that, because in fact on Black Friday, rather than saying to people go out and shop like crazy, they did know that they are obviously II is for people who love nature, who want to go out there, go camping or whatever. So what they said was to say to people on Black Friday, go outside instead, go out and enjoy nature, don't go shopping. And they really created it as an open platform for people to take part and use the hashtag I opt outside. And it's so interesting to see what have happened in the growth of that campaign from 2015 to 2018, growth from 1.4 million people to 15 million people taking part. And actually, when we did the research for the book, we did actually reach out to some of the state parks in the US, and now it is the second most visited day in the US now in those state parks. So they've really been extremely good at creating that change by giving people a way of taking part. And you can obviously do that when you look at your products as well. As I said today with Airbnb, obviously more and more people are used to that. I mean, if we look at how, for example, people are today hacking IKEA's furniture and taking over the creation of how that furniture should be, it's really about opening up that creativity. And even if this was a store I visited in Berlin for Rittersport, if you know Rittersport, the little squared chocolate bar. And what they've done here is they created this store where you can go in and you can, through co-creation, obviously, create this almost like a Willy Wonka magic factory that you choose whatever you want in it, all the ingredients, etc. And the little chocolate bar is created in front of your eyes. It's really about giving people a much bigger choice. Lego also now have a platform that's called Lego Ideas. I absolutely love it. When I was a kid, I loved Lego. And here people can pitch their Lego models. And if they get enough votes, they will actually be turned into production, carrying the Lego Idea label. And you will actually get part of the revenue. So a completely different way of thinking about your marketing efforts, and especially because we live in a time and day where people are not just wanting to buy more stuff, but in fact how we actually all want to take part. As I gave you the example with the past, I think the idea is that today everybody can buy identity or status, but in fact, what's so hard to do today, what cannot be bought, is obviously, experiences and self-actualization. So that, in many ways, are much more high status, seen as high status today. Now, when obviously in some parts of the world, people are getting richer and richer. So consumption in that aspect is changing, as I said, from not just being a value crusade to now actually being about self-actualization, who you can help people become. So one of the questions obviously you can ask yourself is really, how can you open up for people's dreams, passions, and creativity across the marketing mix, which is so incredibly important to look at, because we aren't living in a world of mass marketing anymore. It is really about time we open up, and the wheel of transformability is really one of those tools that can help provoke you to think differently about how you can make people much more active participants across the marketing mix in general. And in fact, actually, if we look at how that is ultimately also changing retail today, this is a brand called Respect Your Universe. It's a Canadian sports retailer. And in a time where brick and mortar stores are definitely challenged, one of the things they have in their stores is they actually do have a gym in the store. So if you are let's say, passionate about kickboxing or whatever else you're passionate about, and you want to host a session, you can go and do that in one of RYU's stores. So kind of really try to open up your stores for people's passions is a great way. It's also a great way of getting a footfall in a store. and even looking at how cities today are transforming, because to be honest, most cities, unfortunately, is just about buying stuff. It's about shopping. It's about big malls. But today I see this across territories. Cities are suddenly understanding that maybe it's also about the cities to understand how do you create a good life for its citizens. This is actually a picture from Copenhagen that is showing some of the things that the municipality of Copenhagen is doing to keep its citizens more healthy. So overall, this approach, the Hero Trap, the book is really essentially about leadership and how leadership is changing. How leadership is no longer often just a male white guy shouting, "This is my beliefs, this is my dreams, I'm the military leader, go in that direction. I'm going to write a big purpose on the wall where we put me at the center of it. You know, we're in the business to save our home planet, and I'm teasing you with Patagonia." But instead, where leadership, it's about growing people. I got to say, the best leaders in my life has really been people who say, "Welcome into my organization. How can I help you grow? How can I help you become more?" And this really also falls in line with most movements today. I mean, if you look at the Me Too movement, it's not the typical movement that have um, uh, a phase or a strong leadership, but that all of us can understand what Me Too means to each one of us. Even I can do it as a man. If we look at what Greta Thunberg have done, obviously she is the poster girl of the movement, but how she has empowered young people across the world to stand up and do something for climate action. So for me, it's about time we change leadership. For me, I used to believe in purpose, but I think a new approach is needed because I do see that when you stop being this self-centric teacher, but you actually become a coach, amazing things can happen. Like we've seen here with the 3 girls that joined the Opt Outside campaign, they can definitely feel the excitement on their own bodies. Or if we take this runner who have joined District Vision's running classes, talking about mindful training and how that has pushed him uh, towards new heights in his training. Or if we just look at this statement that's absolutely beautiful from this mother who writes about how her young 12-year-old girl is teasing her father and older brother that if they just ran like a girl, they would run faster. So when we talk about how do we create authentic leadership in this space, how do we make sure that this is not just another BS from another company? I think it's about time that we step down from this purpose pedestal, and we actually start enabling and creating change in people's lives, because it is really about, the biggest proof point is really about getting people to achieve what they want to achieve. And for me, this is also about how we hopefully at one point can get out of this consumption drive, because I think by this approach, it's much more about self-actualization. It's much more about dreams. It's much more about passions, because it's about realizing the best things in life aren't things. And it's really about encouraging people to do all these amazing things that I think a lot of us during COVID-19 have understood, that in these challenging times, a lot of us had opportunity to pick up new hobbies, or maybe bring back old hobbies, or maybe starting to bake, maybe start spending more time with our kids. And something that I think a lot of us have found a lot of profound value in, because in fact, we are not driven by status or by money. We are actually driven by the things that we like, the things that we do. And this is also important because ultimately, as I said, I have through my career been driven by how do we create change, and how do we create change and scale. And obviously, we are that one generation who are tasked with what can feel like an insurmountable challenge. In fact, that climate emissions and so many of our even socioeconomic trends are getting out of hand. So we need to create change fast. So for me, change really begins by understanding that we are our own biggest barriers to creating change. And if we want to change the world, we've got to start by changing ourselves. And this is ultimately why I say it's not about the why, it really is about who you can help people become. So this was a bit of the methodology that I had for you here today. And before we do a wrap up, I think let's have a conversation about and give you an opportunity to ask questions. This can be with assignments you're working on. This could be about some of the frameworks and as, again, if you want to ask them on camera, you can do that. You can raise your hand, and Myra can help you, or you can she can help unmute you. Or you're also very much welcome just to ask those questions in the chat. So this is your opportunity to obviously challenge this approach, or maybe learn a bit more. So thank you so much, Marie, about it. You're asking if you are going to receive the presentation, and yes, for sure, we will share the presentation with you as well. Svein Erik is having to pick up his daughter. That is important, and he's heading out. I get that, so thank you so much, obviously, to all of you. But I will again encourage you, if you have questions, now is ultimately the time to ask them. And obviously you can also ask them afterwards. You're more than welcome to write on social or by email if you have any other questions, or you want to know more about this methodology. And actually online we do have a number of tools. I showed you the little map that you can use. But we have a question coming in now here from Alexis. So thank you so much. And the question, and a very good question: do you think this applies to charities as well? Yes, it does. I mean, the approach, the arrow, is a tool to unlocking change, to find a meaningful role to play as a leader, whether you're a charity, an organization, or you're a CEO of a company. And one of the examples I mentioned earlier was, in fact, the Movember movement, and how they have seen by empowering people, by taking a completely much more decentralized way of looking at leadership, have grown into one of the biggest nonprofits in a very short amount of time. So this definitely applies to nonprofits as well. And we have another question here from Ardita. So thank you so much for joining. No, this is actually Olona. Thank you so much. And the question is: I work at an ad agency. The agency is called Tata Mata. My question is, how do I, as a creative, start applying these methods to a specific client, since the clients I manage are not conscious brands? Can you please give me some examples? Thank you so much. I think, this is one of the questions I get time and time again. I mean, obviously, this is a journey, and it does take a lot of education. I know that I did tease a little bit by saying we are entering into a post-purpose marketplace, but obviously there are clients who yet aren't getting this mindset at all. I think a good place to begin is obviously to start showing them examples of purposeful campaigns, of purposeful brands who are doing these things, and seeing how that grows the business, how that grows brand love, how whether that is some of the good examples from Unilever. And I mean, this was really, as I said, a lot of the key stuff that was in my first book, Goodvertising. Obviously on the Goodvertising website, that is goodvertising.info. There's lots of examples there. You can start showing them. But secondly, it is really about trying to have these frank conversations, to talk about, if you look at a landscape, if you look at positioning, and you say, how do you find a blue ocean? if you are a brand today and you know that people are falling out of love with most brands, if we know today that people aren't just buying stuff, but they are actually looking for a bigger role from these companies to play, how can you then deliver on that? So I think it's very good to have these sort of frank conversations. This is also sometimes what we tend to do, that we go in and we facilitate some of those conversations, probably try to create education around it. So it could even bring your client into some of these conversations as well, because I think it's important that we in the ad industry understand how branding is dramatically changing. And for me, through my 20 years in advertising, I've seen it true and true. And I mean, as I said, I judge Cannes, I judge DNAD, I judge a lot of these award shows. I can definitely see how there's a change happening. So, and again, there's a follow-up question here. I am also interested to know, how did you transform to good advertising from the advertising world? You know what? It's never, in hindsight, if I look back, my light bulb moment was in fact the Climate Summit in Copenhagen in around 2009. I think we were hosting Climate Summit here in Copenhagen, and that provoked me because obviously the politicians didn't come up with a solution to climate change. So I thought, what if the world's biggest brands could play a part? I mean, some of these brands like P&G, etc., touch billions of people's lives on a daily basis. So what if they could sort of be a force for good? So that was obviously the very kind of first journey into purpose. And for me, this was my early start with working with organizations on purpose, and then obviously taking a conscious choice, moving from the medium-sized agency I did have. There was very much working a bit like a Naked out of the UK, but primarily focused in Scandinavia, to the advertising agency, where we of course today have a much more global footprint. And in so many ways, it's also about taking our own medicine as agencies, because way too often as agencies, and obviously there's probably a couple of brands on this call as well, but agencies typically always pitch themselves on things they say clients shouldn't do, because what we do is we show our portfolios, our products, and then if that's not enough, we put a sort of certification on it. So we say, oh, we want gold in Cannes and all that stuff, instead of actually understanding, how can we stand up? How can we stand for something? How can we talk about something that's interesting, that differentiates us in the market? And for me, with the Good Advertising Agency, that was something that was very important. And as I said, I mean, today we do work with all stakeholders, whether that is agencies, organizations, brands, and nonprofits. We do work with leadership as well. So for us, we are really in the intersection, because, as I said, our purpose is really much more about being a catalyst for your change, and that's the thing that excites me. That's the thing that inspires me when I'm sometimes giving up and thinking, oh, change isn't happening at fast enough pace. So yeah. So do we have any more questions? Because this is, as I said, just a little final wrap-up session, and then we probably will end very shortly. But this is, as I said, really your opportunity to ask questions and maybe get some feedback, even if you have a concrete assignment that you're working on that in your head is just exploding and you don't know how to deal with it. This is your time. So there's a question from Costanza. So thank you so much again. So a question about good advertising. I am truly impressed by your company and the work you are doing. Thank you so much. What does it take and how does it work to get involved with your network as an individual or as a startup, if even possible, of course? Very good question. And yes, we are actually right now working on a much more decentralized approach to scaling up. So we do have a network, we do have franchise partners, for example, at the moment in the Adriatic region. And this is something that we will be scaling much more up this next half year. Obviously now being unfortunately faced with the pandemic, some of these plans have been slowed down a little bit. But I will encourage you, if you are interested in either obviously joining as an individual and learning more about these processes, or if you are an agency and you think that these methodologies and this mindset is something that you're interested in, we are always interested in opening up this approach and scaling up, because I think by the end of the day, it is about collaboration. By the end of the day, it is about helping each other out. And obviously advertising can be many wonderful things. And if we can all stand together to use our skill sets to create and craft better, more long-lasting brands, I think that's the benefit to all of us. So I hope that did answer questions. You're welcome to send us an email as well. And so any last questions, because else we will wrap up this little session. I know that Myra have sent all of you the PDF. I will also encourage you to go online and look at the web store. There's a couple of methodologies there, like the little brand map that you can use as well if you want to either work with the arrow or the second one, the wheel of transformability. There are some tools there that you can use, because by the end of the day, I wrote this book to enable change. I wrote this book as a tool for you to use to create meaningful leadership and to craft meaningful, hopefully long-living brands. So thank you so much to all of you for joining this webinar. It's been a pleasure. And we will have two other webinars coming up very shortly. We'll have one on sustainable marketing. It's always a lot of fun. It's very hands-on. And we have partnership workshop coming up with Rawit from Mindscapes out of Israel, that takes a very hands-on metric approach to creating and crafting impactful campaigns. So lots of interesting new learning coming up. And as I said, any questions, any help you need, always feel free to reach out. It's been a pleasure meeting all of you. So thank you so much, and thank you again, Hope, for clarifying that little comment. So thank you all, and obviously for those of you who still yet haven't read the book, obviously you can learn a lot more about that approach there as well. So thank you. Having a lovely beginning to this week, and promise me to stay safe, and hopefully we will see each other at another time. So thank you so much to all of you. Thanks. Thank you.